This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it, and that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Melissa Dinwiddie on the show. She's a Juilliard-trained dancer, professional artist, jazz songwriter, singer, and the author of a book called The Creative Sandbox Way. She's helped many companies, including Google and Meta and more, Salesforce and some of our other tech giants that we talk about on the show quite a bit. She has helped them out with leadership and expressing their creativity. So we're going to talk about that today. Anyway, with all that being said, Melissa, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me, John. It's great to be here.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background and how you got into helping people and businesses with creativity.
Yes. Well, as you noted, I have a very unexpected background for working in tech, tech adjacent, shall we say. My path has been anything but linear. I started as a Juilliard-trained dancer. And then I kind of fell backwards into a career as a professional calligrapher and artist. And as a sort of a side thing, as a way to sort of escape, I got into being an artist as actually I was making art as a way to procrastinate what I was supposed to be doing at the time. And that ended up becoming my career, my business. And then I didn't have anything to do as my sort of procrastination device. So music became my procrastination device. And I became a jazz singer and singer-songwriter and performed on the side as a singer-songwriter and toured for a while doing that. And also have been an improv and still am an improv performer. And somewhere along the line, I realized that the creative tools that I had used to overcome my own inner critic were exactly what corporate teams needed to break out of creative ruts. And now, as you said in your intro, I help teams at companies like Google and Meta and Salesforce use play and creativity to unlock innovation and improve communication. And I also wrote a book as part of my journey was I've struggled a lot in my own life with creative block, perfectionist paralysis, and the comparison trap, or what I call the comparison trap, sometimes referred to as comparisonitis. And, that kept me really stuck in a lot of my life. And in figuring out how to get past those blocks, personally, I discovered that what worked for me also worked for other people. And the sort of tools that I figured out that worked for me, I kind of turned into, for a while, I turned them into some online courses and coaching and communities. And that became a second business in addition to my art business. And so I was a professional creativity instigator for many years. And as part of that, one of the things that came out of that is my book, The Creative Sandbox Way. And that book outlines 10 guideposts that I developed to get myself out of creative stuck. And out of that set of guideposts, ultimately came my framework, my Create the Impossible framework, which is what I use now. And if you go up to my YouTube channel or you go to my blog, you'll see I talk a lot about my framework, the Create the Impossible framework. And that's what my keynote is all about, my main keynote. Then the framework is 3 steps. Sounds really simple. Play hard, make crap, learn fast. And it's really a repeatable process for helping people get past blocks, really.
So let's talk about let's break this down a little bit and talk about some of these things in a little bit more depth. But before we do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about, you mentioned calligraphy a little bit at the beginning, and it
Sure.
reminded me of back in 2020. I was speaking at a conference, and it was right before COVID. It was in January, and the conference organizers, I guess, had hired someone to draw my talk as I was giving it.
Oh yeah.
And it was it was, I think that was the coolest thing, because it was a different way of communicating the things that I was trying to communicate. And it just reminded me of that experience. How much do you use artwork when presenting as a way to really like make a message stick?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that when when somebody drew your talk, that is often referred to as graphic recording,
Mhm.
sometimes graphic facilitation. And I have done some of that. In fact, I'm trying to remember what those years were when I pivoted to start my consultancy. That was 2017. Not long after that, I spent I don't know, a minute or so really dove into graphic recording, and I thought that that might be a direction where I was going to really focus on.
Mhm.
And I have all the tools, and I if you dig deep enough into my blog and into my social media, you'll see time-lapsed videos of me doing graphic recording.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I have all these big boards and things, lots of markers. So I don't do any like the keynote, my Create the Impossible keynote doesn't right now have any graphic recording elements in it, but absolutely love that methodology. And it's so incredibly powerful. Like you said, it's a different way of capturing and presenting information. And it's uh, one of the things that I love about graphic visual facilitation, presentation of ideas in that way is that it allows us to use our brains in a different way. It taps into different parts of our brain. And so I really highly recommend it, not just for to consume information in that way, but I think that kids should be learning how to take notes in that way.
Mm.
Visual note taking. When I started doing it myself, just for taking notes at conferences or, going to a meeting or something like that, what what you will notice if you start taking notes visually like that, it doesn't matter if you have any drawing ability at all. The thing is, you can be making scribbles, you can be making stick figures. It doesn't matter if you can draw. You might think, "Oh my God, I'm not an artist. I can't draw." But here's the thing: you, you have to make choices when you have to decide. Oh, somebody is talking about, I don't know, project management, whatever. Pick your topic, whatever it is that they're saying, and you want to capture that on the
Mhm.
page. You have to make a choice about how you're going to represent that
Mm.
in visual form. And so every time you make a choice as to how you're going to represent that as a visual metaphor, it's forcing you to use your mind in a different way. And and also what happens is, so you create this little visual metaphor, whatever that scribble happens to be. And so you're creating layer upon layer of meaning, and and then you're deciding where you're going to put it on the paper. And then your paper becomes more visually interesting. And then when you go back and look at that paper, a week or a month or a year later, you actually remember that talk so much better because, you know, how have we been taught to take notes in school? Probably some kind of an outline, right? So it's, one line of text, and then, 1A line of text, 1B line of
Yeah.
text, or, then 2 line of text or whatever. It's completely boring. There's no differentiation between page 1 and page 2. You don't remember the talk at all because it's just a bunch of text, and it's just who goes back and looks at their notes. But when you've
Exactly.
got visual images on your page, you actually remember the talk better, and the page is actually interesting to look at. So I just highly, highly recommend visual note taking. I'm so passionate about this. I wish.
I'm glad we talked about it because I think it's so fascinating. I mean, I still have that poster in my office today, and again, it's from
Of course
5 years
you
ago.
do.
And every time someone
Yeah.
comes in, it's the first time they visit my office. They always ask me about it, and we talk about it. So it's one of those things that always is right there, top of mind.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that all I would love to see more conferences incorporating and retreats or whatever workshops incorporating visual note taking,
Mm.
because it adds such a layer of meaning, and it helps people um, absorb what's happening and remember what happened as well. It's an incredibly powerful tool. Uh, Typically, the budget doesn't allow for it, whatever, but it's really incredibly powerful. So I'm a huge advocate for it. I don't incorporate it as much as it's. I'm often up there, the one who's up there with the microphone. So I'm not
You
typically
can't do both.
actually doing the. Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard to do both, to have the microphone in my hand, or wrapped around my head or whatever, and be capturing at the same time. It's very attention intensive to be capturing with a pen, with a marker.
Yeah, I bet. Uh, so let's get into this create the impossible framework and where that came from, and what are those three pieces that kind of make that up.
Yeah, it's the framework itself is kind of came from the model of the framework. Because the framework is it's a repeatable process, and it's an iterative process, and it came from it evolved out of an iterative process, basically, if that makes sense. It's very meta. But so first I developed my the guideposts that form the backbone of my book, The Creative Sandbox Way. And there are 10 of those. And they came about because I was just so mired and stuck. I was desperate to get back to making art, to creating for the joy of it. I'd gotten into being an artist because I loved creating.
Mhm.
But after 15 years of making art for other people on commission, and also I had this entire line of artwork, of prints, wedding documents that I had designed that people could order from me, that you know, all were there because, paying the bills, right? And I had bought into this story that I had in my head, that everything that I made, that, every piece of art that I made had to make money. It had to be amazing. Well, nothing is
Mm.
more paralyzing than thinking that everything you make has to be amazing and has to make money. So I kept saying to myself, I just don't have time to make art for the joy of it, which was a story in my head. And so I just never made anything for fun anymore. And I was really burned out. And I knew that I had to get back to making art to fill my soul. And I just couldn't get myself to make anything because I was so mired in this perfectionism. So I developed this set of little rules for myself to try and get back into the mind space of being a little kid. Little kids, you see them, playing in a sandbox, or playing with blocks, or playing with crayons or whatever. They're not comparing their work to somebody else. They're not thinking about, is this going to make money? Is this going to get me a gold star? They're just making a mess and thinking like, gee, what would happen if I tried this?
Mm.
And that's where I wanted to be. So the handful of little rules at the time were things like, there is no wrong. Um, if you get to the place where it's not done, but it needs something, but you're afraid to try something because you're afraid it might ruin it, just go ahead and ruin it. There are little rules like that. And over the next few years, those rules expanded into 10, and I made them more pithy and concise. And those 10 guideposts, then ultimately, I turned them into a little online course. Hundreds of people went through this course. Actually, there's probably thousands. And I was getting tons of feedback from people saying that, gee, I went through that book, The Artist's Way, and I'm still stuck. But your course got me back to making art for the first time, overnight. I've finally reclaimed this, this joy that I've been missing for years. I was just getting tons of feedback. And I realized, wow, I've got something here that is really powerful and profound. And so it took me a while, but I finally turned it into a book back in 2016. So that's the story of those guideposts. And then that was 2016. And then I pivoted to work with organizations in 2017. And it was just actually in the past year that I, really got to the heart of the transformation that happens with, with these guideposts and with what it is that I do with teams and organizations. And they come down to these 3 steps of my Create the Impossible framework. And the first step is play hard.
Well,
And what
or it sounds easy, right?
right is, well, with, as with so many things, it's easy, and yet, we tend to make things hard on ourselves, right?
We do,
So
especially as adults, right?
exactly. So because we're adults, we have this expectation that everything we do has to be amazing and has to be excellent. And so the challenge of playing hard is that, allowing ourselves to get back into the mind space of being a little kid and to open ourselves to experimentation and play and to allow ourselves to follow our curiosity.
Yeah.
So that's really the concept of play hard, and to give ourselves space to be in that 4-year-old mind space, which, as we go about our lives, adulting, it can be really challenging. But that's what play hard is all about. The second step is make crap. And this is really challenging as well, because we feel like everything has to be excellent.
Right.
But when everything has to be excellent, that is incredibly paralyzing. And that does not enable us to have any kind of, that is not the recipe for innovation or creativity, which of course is required if we're going to have innovation. What innovation and creativity really need is a lot of quantity. And we need to allow ourselves to make a lot of crap in order to get to the excellence. So we need to lower the bar, let ourselves make a lot of crap. And that is what will enable us to discover, there's something good here inside this piece of crap. So I'm going to persist with that and see how I can make it better. So that's the concept of make crap. Step 3 is learn fast. So we've allowed ourselves to play hard. We've made a lot of crap. And now we're going to learn fast from that and iterate. And that's the concept of learning fast. So this is it's a cycle. It's an ongoing, repetitive cycle. And we're continually, ideally, always at one of these steps, or possibly multiple places in this framework at all times. And when that is the case, that leads to continual breakthroughs and innovations.
Yeah, it reminds me of like going through like the agile process for software development, like the first time. The first time you're going through something like this, you're kind of taught to have fun with it, right? And to don't just think about like the stress of building something new, but you get back to the joy of coding and the joy of making something. You talk about making crap. Yeah, you have to have a volume of what we call MVPs, in the software world, of minimal viable products, to find out which one's going to click and what are the features that are actually used and actually needed. And if you don't have to have something like fully fleshed out. You just have to have the basics to get it, to learn from that. And then you get into that, what you said, learn fast, of iterating and finding like, okay, they really use this piece, but it would be nice to have this little add-on. So let's iterate and put that piece in there. Now what's being used the most, and what is the new minimal viable product, and what is the next step that we have to build? So
Exactly. Yes.
yeah, so that sounds like it just reminds me of those early days. I can think back in like 2010. I built my first like iPhone app, and I did it just kind of for fun, playing around with it. But it was that same thing where I was just playing hard, and I built like probably, I don't know, 30 or 40 apps that year, and only, maybe 3 were somewhat mildly successfsuccessful. But it
Right.
was that whole idea of what is clicking? What are people like? What's being used? And nobody really knew iPhones because they were pretty much brand new back then. So what is the use case going to be? Let's just have fun with it and let's keep learning and keep putting things out there and seeing what sticks.
Yes, and when you can be in that space of, "Let's just have fun with this,
Hmm.
and let's just keep putting things out there," that is exactly when the breakthroughs and innovations happen.
Hmm.
But if we're
Absolutely.
in this place of everything has to be amazing, everything has to be great, then we all know what happens then, or hopefully, we this is what happens. We get stuck, and it gets very stiff, and that is not what is gonna lead to the best work, the most innovative work, and, that's not the way to get there.
Right. For me, I can think back like of my career going from, being a, engineer to manager to, executive and going through this whole process. And where I see like the thing that really put the damper on all this stuff and kind of ruined it for me was when they had to put like dollar amounts to it and I had to start budgeting things. And it's like I just want to have fun. I want to build stuff. I don't want to think about like what is the ROI of this thing, and that kind of stifled, the creativity.
Yeah, it's exactly what happened to me when I put up a shingle as a calligrapher and artist.
Mhm.
And it's a real challenge because, you know, as an artist, the sort of the holy grail is so many artists want to make a living from their art. And, same thing, like you go into whatever software development or graphic design or whatever it is, and this is the thing that you love to do, and you want to make a living doing that thing. And yet, when you start to rely on that to bring the money in, it can really put a damper on the joy and the thing that brought you to it in the first place.
Exactly.
So the challenge is, how do we retain the joy and that childlike enthusiasm and the love while also making a living from it, right? While also bringing in the profit. And that's the sort of razor's edge that we have to walk.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's, for me, I feel like my job as a leader sometimes is to remove the burden of, the ROI type questions and that away from our engineers and our developers so that they can maintain that creative focus.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's very, very wise because, and that's one of the things about the Create the Impossible framework. That very first step is play hard because we absolutely need people to be in that play hard space in order to get the best work out of them.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And so, how is it that we can get our team back into that play hard phase when we've fallen out of it?
Yes. Well, that's one of my areas of expertise as a play practitioner and as a facilitator, and what I bring in the work that I do. So, a few things to think about. You know, we think about work, the workspace, as, this is, play is the opposite of work is the opposite of play, but it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, I often say play is not the opposite of work. Play is actually how we make work more effective.
Mm.
So we have to stop thinking of play and work as these binary opposites and bring them together. So how can we think about what we do at work as an opportunity to bring in play? So, for example, when you've got a team meeting, instead of inviting people to check in, like, how are you feeling today? Well, that's a great opportunity to bring in some playful energy. Invite people, for example, uh, where are you? If you were a weather report, what's your weather report today? So people could say, I'm cloudy with a chance of showers, or I'm
Yeah.
sunny with a bit of clouds, or something. That is a super simple way to invite people to check in that offers just a little little bit of playfulness, and also gets people to, it invites a little curiosity, sparks a little curiosity. So if I say, well, I'm sunny with a bit of clouds, well, what does that mean? So people this might spark some conversation. It doesn't take any extra time, but it just adds a little playfulness to that, opening check-in. So that's one little example of how you might incorporate a little bit of playfulness into your workday, right? So I have a ton of these kinds of, offers that I write about this kind of thing all the time on my blog and on LinkedIn and on YouTube. Other examples of like how I work with teams, I do a lot of work in the areas of what I call the 3 C's.
The 3 C's.
The 3 C's: connection, communication, and creativity. This is the intersection at which, if any one of these 3 C's is broken, you're not going to have innovation in your organization. Innovation lies at the intersection of these 3 C's. So the work that I do with organizations is typically around these 3 C's. Now, first of all, I have to say, you can't hire me without connection. Everything that I do, connection is baked in. So that's just a given. But I do a lot of work around helping teams communicate for greater impact and influence. For example, I've done a lot of work at Meta with their research teams to help them communicate for greater influence. They have these amazing insights, but they can't get those insights spread throughout the organization because they don't know how to communicate them effectively. So they bring me in to help them do that better. So here's an example.
To be like a really common problem with engineers and really highly technical people, that we have these great ideas, but it's really difficult for us to communicate them.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where I come in. So here's an example of one of the activities that I might do. And I have a ton of these kinds of things. They typically are drawn from the world of theater and improv. I'm not pulling people up on stage and telling them to perform. Instead, I'm doing things like putting them into pairs or small groups and having them do a fun activity that might seem like it has nothing to do with communication, but then we come back together and they connect the dots. This is what I call my fun my fun paradigm. FUN. It's a acronym. Yeah. So fun stands for find the flow. And that's where I send them off to do this activity. They get them laughing. They're just doing this fun activity. U stands for unlock the meaning. This is where they connect the dots. And then N stands for name the change, or now what. So here's an example of an activity. It's called, I call it the time traveler. So I pair people up. One person is from the present time. Everything's normal for them. The other partner is a time traveler from 500 years ago. So it's 1525. So first, before I send them off into their pairs, we do a little, popcorn share about what would be different for people who living in 1525. How is life different for them? Oh, no electricity, no running water, no modern medicine. There's, lots of different things that are different for people in 1525, right? So then, before I send them off into their pairs, I tell them, the present time person, your cell phone is about to ring. And you are going to have to explain to your time traveling partner what this device is. And remember, there's a high likelihood that your time traveling partner is going to think that it's witchcraft. Because, they've never been exposed to anything like this before, right? So in addition to explaining to them what it is, you're also going to have to convince them that you're not a witch and that you should not be condemned to burn at the stake. So you now have 2 minutes. Go. So they all go and do their thing. And it's an impossible task. I've done it myself. It is totally impossible. We come back together after 2 minutes and I poll the room and I say, okay, how many witches are in the room? Invariably, half the room raises their hands because it's an impossible task. But then I ask, okay, time travelers, did any of your partners do anything that was effective? And somebody raises their hands and they say, yeah, they said something that was always some sort of an analogy. Their partner used some sort of an analogy that clicked for them somehow. Great. So now we've learned something. So then we switch roles, and now the new partners have to, they go off again and they have a slightly different task. It's not a cell phone this time, it's something else. But now they have a leg up. So now they know, aha, I'm going to have to figure out some kind of an analogy that has to do something with the context that my partner's going to understand in their, context of living in 1525. So we do it again, and then we come back together and we, debrief again. So, of course, nobody is going to probably run into somebody from 1525, but there is 100% chance that we are all going to run into people who have a different context from our own. And I get feedback all the time from people who go through these sessions who say, oh my gosh, I was in a conversation with a cross-functional teammate and I was getting so frustrated because they didn't understand me. And then I remembered that activity and I realized they weren't being a jerk. They weren't stupid. I just needed to find an analogy that made sense to them in their context and that it was my responsibility, not theirs. And so that's an example of the kind of thing that I do. Now, the activities are all different. They range. Sometimes they're in big groups. Sometimes they're in pairs. Sometimes they're in small groups. But that's the kind of thing that I do with the teams that I work with.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's I think it's definitely one of those areas where teams need more of this. And I find like it gets once your company or your organization gets into a rut of not communicating well, it seems like they just build up walls and there's less and less communication that goes on.
It's so true. And one of the things that I especially love helping companies with is when I can come in and work with teams that normally don't communicate well with each other, that are
Mm.
siloed,
Yes.
like sales and marketing,
Mhm.
engineering and marketing, when I can connect those teams together, because so often they don't communicate at all.
Right.
And it's amazing the changes, the transformation that can happen, especially when companies bring me in to work with them over time. That's when the real transformation happens. It's amazing.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. Um, One of the things that I saw you mention in your emails was about an impact innovation checklist. Tell me a little bit about that and a little bit about how people can pick up a copy of that or learn more about what you're working on.
Yeah, I put together a cheat sheet basically to jumpstart your next idea, because the fastest way to create the impossible is to start messy and learn fast.
Mhm.
So it's this one-page checklist that gives you a quick, practical way to unlock fresh ideas and spark innovation fast, especially if you think you're not the creative type.
You know what? I used to struggle with not believing that I was creative or the creative type because I thought, well, I'm a math guy. I'm more of a, I like history. I like math. I'm not really big into creative. I can't draw, so therefore I'm not creative.
My God,
And
we all do that, right?
yeah, yeah. And then I had this mentor one time that just told me, he goes, you say you're not creative, but as part of a software engineer, you're creating solutions to problems all day long.
Absolutely. This is one of the things that I love about delivering my keynote, my Create the Impossible keynote. It's so much about this story that we tell ourselves that we're not creative, and that one about I can't draw, therefore I'm not
Mhm.
creative. That is the worst, and it gets all of us. And by the way, me too. Even though I made my living as a professional artist, that one nailed me so bad. So none of us is immune to that. And yeah, anyway, so I do have this, I just have it. Sorry, I get very passionate about this. This is the thing I'm most passionate about, is helping people tap into their native creativity, because it nailed me so bad and it nails so many people so bad. And I really am on a mission to help people tap into their creativity, because it's there. And anyway, so I do have this checklist, and it's at bit.ly/a geek leader thank you, all one word, all lowercase.
Awesome. I'm going to link that in the show notes too at geekleader.com, so people can go to this episode in the show notes and click through to find that. Where else can people connect with you online, find out more about your topics, maybe pick up a copy of your book, and maybe engage you to help with their team?
Yeah, you can find me at melissadinwiddie.com. You can find me on LinkedIn at Melissa Dinwiddie. You can find me on YouTube at Melissa Dinwiddie. And then to break the pattern, you can find me on Instagram at _creative_life.
Awesome. And I'll link those two in the show notes at geekleader.com, so people can go there and follow you and connect with you and pick up a copy of your book. Melissa, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate it. I love to talk about creativity and how we as tech leaders can focus more on that and make our teams better.
Thanks so much for having me, John. This has been so much fun.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to. Click on their links and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.